Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education Diversity Series. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Meg Hancock to bring greetings from the College of Education Leadership team.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to host another Nystrand Center Excellence in Education Forum, and we are exceptionally excited to welcome Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker from the Kentucky Department of Education. To give you a little bit of background on the Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education, it is dedicated to the continual support of educational excellence for all students, made possible through innovative thinking, transformational educator preparation, professional development, and supportive learning environments. The Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education supports and facilitates education reform through its outstanding special programs and initiatives, such as the one you will see today. Strong community partnerships are the heart of our success and serve as an inspiration for those who work so diligently to provide a better education for our children. And it is our mission to continue with transformation through collaboration by leading the discussion on education reform, policy, research, and practice. So today, before we get to our guest speaker, I want to introduce you to a very dear friend and colleague. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Geneva Stark, who is the director of the Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education. She is a clinical assistant professor in educational leadership, evaluation, and organizational development. And all of this became effective just 1 week after the shutdown in March 2020. So we are so glad to have Dr. Stark on board with us. Dr. Stark comes to us from Jefferson County Public Schools, so she's probably a little bit familiar to some of you, where she was most recently the Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Administrator. Prior to this role, Dr. Stark served in JCPS as a district coordinator and human resource administrator, principal, and assistant principal. In addition, Dr. Stark was a KDE, Kentucky Association of School Administrators Superintendent Fellow, former president of the Kentucky Association of Secondary School Principals. Dr. Stark is a noted educator, thought leader, especially one to me, and frequent presenter on diversity, equity, inclusion, and implicit bias. Her community leadership is also very impressive. She serves on the National Alliance of Black School Educators Board of Directors, a member of the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, and is the former president of the Greater Louisville Alliance of Black School Educators. Dr. Stark is also a member of Senator Gerald Neal's African American Initiative. She is a volunteer for the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. And Dr. Stark holds a PhD in educational leadership and policy from the University of Louisville. She has served as a mentor to students, teachers, support staff, and administrators in JCPS, locally, statewide, and nationally. For us, Dr. Stark is a true champion for education and is looking forward to leveraging her knowledge, experiences as a K-12 educator, collaborator, motivator, team builder, and diversity consultant to focus on taking the Nystrand Center of Excellence in Education to the next level. I'd like to welcome Dr. Geneva Stark.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Hancock. Truly appreciate the greetings from you and just your leadership and your support of the Nystrand Center. Right now, Brandon, I see a number of individuals that's in the chat that's experiencing some difficulties. So can we show them the panel today, or look at the chat and see exactly what's happening with that? We know with technology, there's always some complications, you know. But today we have the honor of having Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker here to speak at the Nystrand Center of Excellence Speaker Series. Born and raised in Northeastern Arkansas, Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker served 31 years in public school systems across the country. During that time, he held positions as a teacher, assistant principal, director of secondary curriculum, and superintendent. In July of 2018, Dr. Jason Glass, the newly appointed Commissioner of Education for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, selected Dr. Tucker as the agency's first Deputy Superintendent and Chief Equity Officer. Dr. Tucker has been a trailblazer and a mentor in the field of education. He was the first African-American and the upper level administrator in a major Central Ohio school district. And his first superintendents was an American superintendent in the Worthington, Ohio school district, and the first in a multi-district, Licking, Ohio, and the first African-American to lead the 68,000 student district of Douglas, Ohio. He has also mentored many other educators across the country, many of them women and from ethnic minorities. Dr. Tucker has fought and continues to fight properly for the underprivileged and those with special needs. Dr. Tucker earned his PhD and master's from the Ohio State University and his bachelor's degree from Philander Smith College. He's an active member of many educational associations, civic organizations, and committees, including the Colorado Association of School Executives and the National Alliance of Black School Educators. He has served on the State of Ohio Grade 6 Reading Content Advisory Committee and the Northwest Counseling Service Advisory Board. He has given numerous professional presentations across the country and internationally. Dr. Tucker is actively involved in his church and enjoys spending time with his family, volunteering in Princeton, Ohio School District's Thomas S. Woods Tucker Mobile Book Center. What an honor, Dr. Tucker. And debating in his favorite barbershop in Columbus, Ohio. So without further ado, we welcome Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker, KDE Chief Diversity Officer and Deputy Commissioner. Dr. Tucker.
Dr. Stark and Dr. Hancock, thanks for the opportunity to speak. And Dr. Stark, thanks for that beautiful introduction. In fact, it's the nicest thing that's been said about me this entire week. So, let me back up. My mother-in-law has been saying some nice things about me too. So I don't want to forget that, but it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. And while we're doing that, making that transition, maybe Brandon, and certainly want to thank Brandon for his assistance as well, can answer some of the technical questions as I attempt to share my screen here. Okay, are you all able to see the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
There it is. We see it now.
Let's go to presentation mode. What about now? We're good?
There we go. You good.
All right, all right. Again, I want to position our time with you, and I really want this to be more about a conversation. This COVID pandemic, this global COVID pandemic that we're dealing with right now, has really caused issues in terms of us not being there. And I would much rather be in person with you all, and I would much rather be having a conversation than presenting here, but we'll do our best and make this as conversational as possible. At your Kentucky Department of Education, we begin with the notion of context before content. Context before content. And what we're really getting at is we want to ensure context is about positioning the content. What is the intent? When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need to be very clear about our intent before we start with content. So in part one, here in part one, I want to talk about some common language, our current and new initiatives, and next steps. So let's start with some current language here. Now, again, positioning the context before the content. And it's really important that we have some shared language. When we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about one's ethnicity or one's race. And one of the things we really endeavored to do here at the Kentucky Department of Education is to have a broad umbrella of what diversity means. It means respecting individual differences, whether it's personality, learning styles, life experiences, class, language, culture, ethnicity, languages spoken at home, and bringing everyone to the table and respecting, again, individual differences. Many times we hear diversity, we talk about Black and white or some other ethnic or racial group. But folks, I'm here to tell you, this country here is more than just 1, 2, 3, or 4 races. And we know when we talk about race, that's a nebulous term, if you will. That's really not a scientific term. We are more alike across the spectrum than we are in one particular group. And so when we talk about diversity, we more or less use ethnicity rather than that nebulous term race. So again, respecting individual differences. And then let's talk a little bit about equity. What do we mean by equity? It certainly is not about demonizing people because of their race or indoctrinating students. I remember Dr. Stark and our folks who are listening with us today. One of our lawmakers here in Kentucky, and I don't want to just pick on him, but if I talk too much about him, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I was a little concerned early on when we really started to focus on this work and we talked about equity. And this national lawmaker and others across the country said that equity is a code word for racism. It is simply not. It is simply not. It is not about demonizing people because of their race or indoctrinating students about one race is more superior than others. And this term, equity, has really been embraced by our friends at the Kentucky Department of Education and across the Commonwealth. I see Dr. Monahan is on with us, and I really appreciate the work that he does and our other co-op executive directors in helping us ensure that we are providing supports for students. And I want to quote our commissioner. I know Dr. Stark mentioned Commissioner Glass hired me in July of last year. When we talk about equity, and here's a quote from our very own commissioner, Dr. Glass, so please allow me to digress for a second here. And he says that equity in education is fundamentally an effort to ensure that all of our students have the supports they need to meet our academic standards and to reach their full potential as students, citizens, and human beings. That's what makes us humans. That's the humanity in us. An equity focus in education recognizes that public school students come to us with a variety of backgrounds, needs, supports, and experiences, and that we must take those into account when we consider the education of each child. Not all children, but for each child. And again, I thought that was very powerful on behalf of our commissioner. But I also want us to harken back to our first class. And even I know we probably have some pre-service educators on this program as well. But one of the first laws we learned in our pre-service program was Public Law 94-142, which was signed into law in 1975 by then President Gerald Ford, in which it said that we should provide a free and appropriate public education for all students. That's what this is. This mirrors 94-142. And it's also is the Bill of Rights for Children with Disabilities and their families. We're simply, when we talk about equity in Kentucky and across this beautiful landscape of ours, we're talking about leveling the playing field for all students, regardless of their abilities. Okay, moving on. So what do we mean by inclusion? It's the intentional act of creating an environment that fosters mutual respect and relationships in which each student, and I will add each faculty member, regardless of their intellectual, social, cultural, or geographical background, is welcomed, supported, and valued as fully participants in our society, in our educational institutions. One of the things I like to think back, so I'm going back to my days of being a teacher. I remember as a middle school assistant principal and principal, I was in charge of helping to supervising the 8th grade dance. Our boys would be on one side of the gym, our girls on the other side of the gym. And what we would hope before the night was over, that our boys and girls were able to be more inclusive, that they would come to the center of the gymnasium or the cafeteria, and they would talk. They probably wouldn't dance really close to each other, but they would at least attempt to dance and socialize with each other. So we want to invite all of our kids to the dance. We want to invite regardless of their abilities. We want them to dance, and we want someone to ask them to dance. We want to be fully inclusive. And that's what we're asking for each one of our 650,000 public school students here in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. So that's some of our common language there. And Dr. Stark, I don't know if there are any questions right now in the chat box or not. I know I have an hour with you, an hour plus. And some of you know, and I know you know, Dr. Stark, I am the grandson of a Baptist minister. And so I can talk, and I'm really enthused about this work too, because this is really a game changer. So we've got a lot to share. But if there's some questions pop in, I will answer those questions as well.
Not at this time, but I do like your quote in that, because I heard it before, that diversity is being invited to the dance.
Yes.
But the inclusion is being asked to dance.
Been asked to dance, absolutely.
And,
so
you know,
getting those kids to come together and be respectful of each other and be more inclusive. And here's something that I have really been fighting for quite some time as a principal, as a superintendent, and we've and I say this with a badge of graciousness, if you will. I wear this as a badge of pride, because in my stops, we've been able to really close some opportunity gaps. I don't think that our big problem in America, and again, I've been saying this for a while, it's not the achievement gaps, because we have the best teachers, we have the best administrators, we have the best college professors of education in America, and of course, we have the best students in America. So it's really about closing those achievement gaps. But in my work, we look at, when we start to talk about achievement gaps, it really unfairly places the blame on kids. It implies that children are not achieving because of there's something that's inherently wrong with them. And I also call that deficit thinking, when we put the blame on children. Whereas the opportunity gaps, we draw attention to the conditions and the obstacles that young students face throughout their educational career. Therefore, we need to accurately place responsibilities on the inequitable systems that are in place and start providing opportunities for all students and staff to thrive. And so that's been some of our major learning. That's also been some of our major learning when it relates to putting context before content.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I do have a couple of questions that at the University of Louisville, we're talking about an anti-racist agenda. How do you see that, or if you have knowledge of that, in terms of what's happening in K-12? How do we connect the two?
In terms of how do we connect K-12 with
to higher education? That's the question. Is at U of L, we talk about the anti-racism agenda. How do you see the relations of with what you're talking about? Because and which is just connecting K-12 to higher education regarding diversity, equity, inclusion.
Well, when I start to talk about here in a little bit about some of our current and new diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that are happening here, you will see a close alignment. It has to be a closer or better alignment between what's happening in our K-12 school districts and our higher ed teacher preparation programs. I think it begins and it ends with that. We have to come together, and I'll talk about one or two programs here that demonstrates how important it is that we have that closer connection. So, and I'll get to that throughout the presentation. So let's talk a little bit now about some of our current and new DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the Commonwealth. We are well on our way of putting together our equity toolkit. And in that toolkit, you'll find multiple tools. High quality academic standards, that's where it begins. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. High quality instructional resources, our equity dashboard, our equity playbook, which I am really, really excited about that. The A4 modules, and Dr. Stark, that is an example of a collaboration between the Council for Post-Secondary Education here in Kentucky and the Kentucky Department of Education, where we're putting together modules, anti-bias modules, culturally competent modules that every educator in the Commonwealth has access to, that will better prepare this educator, he or she, as they go into the classroom and interact with their students. So again, that's an example of us, higher ed, working collaboratively with K-12, and it needs to be ongoing. Then also the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching, CAPE, and I'll talk again more about that. But what's at the heart of this work is a multi-tiered system of supports that surrounds all of these tools in this toolkit, in which we're focusing on the whole child. We're looking at the academic achievement of students. We're looking at any of the social and behavioral issues that students may have, but we're paying close attention to the mental health of our students. I guarantee you, if we were to ask our students right now, I know our schools, some of our schools have been in session now a week or two, our students probably not going to talk so much about the academic challenges, it's the mental health challenges. I know we were talking earlier when we look at this pandemic, hopefully, 100 years from now, that group of people will learn from the things we experience. Now, of course, we hope we never are visited by this pandemic again, but certainly, we're learning. And I think we've learned a lot and taken some good steps from last year. So kudos to our educators out there, our K-12 folks out there who are on the front line in helping our students become better citizens and better educated. So when we talk about some of our current initiatives that are happening right now and ongoing initiatives, it begins with high quality instructional standards. The Kentucky Academic Standards implementation is intended to ensure equitable access to high quality, grade level, appropriate learning for all students, in which students should be able to know and demonstrate their knowledge of certain high standards per their grade level. And those standards are available to every student in the Commonwealth. So I really believe that's where equity begins. We're also fortunate at the Kentucky Department of Education to have a relationship with the Council of Chief State School Officers. And we're working with high quality instructional resources as part of our professional learning project. What the research shows us, in personal experience, that if you have novice teachers, beginning teachers, or maybe through some of these teacher ranking systems where the educator is not ranked as high achieving, but if he or she has access to high quality instructional resources. And what are these high quality instructional resources? These are resources that are aligned to KAS, the Kentucky Academic Standards. They are grade level appropriate. Feedback is presented to students. Students and staff have time to reflect, and they are free of bias. And students regardless of their background, see themselves in the curriculum. That's where we get to the term of critical pedagogy. And so we are participating in a statewide pilot project to ensure that every school district has opportunities to purchase these high quality instructional standards. Again, the research is clear. If novice teachers use these materials, the students continue to realize at least a year's worth of growth, because that's ultimately, we want that and more, but we want our students to experience at least a year's worth of growth. Then also, I touched on this earlier, our multi-tiered system of support here at KDE. We want to help our schools and districts provide not only equitable services, but instruction and intervention practices and resources designed to meet the whole child: academic, behavioral, social, and emotional needs. One of the things as I speak with superintendents across the country, and they say, well, Thomas, what would you do? What should we do during these first couple weeks of schools? I said, you know what? This first couple of weeks, I would be building the capacity to reach my kids. I would know that they have someone in my district who cares about them, who cares about their social and emotional learning first and foremost, prior to moving to the academic parts of it. So I would spend my first couple of weeks building those relationships. So in the event, as some school districts across Kentucky and other places have done, in terms of gone back to remote teaching and learning, you would have had that relationship built at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about some of our new DEI initiatives. I talked a little bit about our equity toolkit, and this also gets started with our strategic plan. We have created a DEI strategic plan that outlines every initiative related to DEI across the entire agency, regardless of what department it is, whether it's in the legal department, whether it's in the Office of Teacher Effectiveness, or in personnel. We know what those DEI initiatives are, so that we're not duplicating our efforts. We're bringing our efforts together so that we can reach more students and more staff across the Commonwealth. We have a plan, a date, all laid out. So we're really excited about the strategic plan that we have in the Commonwealth. Then, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the tools that are in our toolkit. But I will say this, and I'll say this as another point of pride. When this toolkit is completed, it will be the most comprehensive toolkit in America. And I really believe that it's going to be a major, major game changer for our students and staff. One of the important parts of the equity playbook will be strategies, research-based strategies to address some of the most pressing needs that we have in K-12 education, to address some of the most pressing opportunity gaps, whether it's student achievement in terms of looking at how certain students, and I don't use the term, and I purposely don't use the term disadvantaged students. I don't get into, except for research purposes, calling students subgroups. I don't. I look at different ethnicities, but we look at students. We look at students, and we've disaggregated the data. Don't get me wrong. We do that, but we look at student achievement because ultimately that's what we want: high student achievement for every student, regardless of their ethnicity, whether they have an IEP or a 504 plan or not. And so we look at any discrepancies in terms of students enrolled in, for example, our very rigorous courses. Is it representative? Do we have a representative number of ethnic minority students in the rigorous courses? And all of our courses are rigorous, but I'm talking about IB, AP courses, and so on and so forth. And even college and career readiness courses. So we have that data. And all that data that I'm talking about here is already going into our equity dashboard. Also, we know from experience and all the research in our classes, disciplinary practices and procedures. Do we have a disproportionate number of Hispanic or white males being suspended or expelled out of school versus other students. And so we're tracking that. Again, the beautiful thing about the dashboard that I mentioned, this is real-time data specific to districts across the Commonwealth, specific to schools. So really excited about that. Again, high quality programming and teachers. Do we have the most qualified teachers teaching our students? And we know that districts are different across the Commonwealth, and there are schools within districts that are different. So what is the quote unquote preparedness of that teacher who's teaching students? And again, do we have high quality programs that students can enroll in? Then also the distribution of funding and resources. When we talk about equity, we know that we shouldn't spend the same amount of money at all of our schools, especially if the needs are different. Again, schools are going to be different across school districts and sometimes and across the state. And so I think about this when I look at my 4 children. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. And you can imagine they don't wear the same shoe size. Now, what sense would it make for me to go out and buy a size 10 Air Jordan gym shoe for all 4 of my kids? And all 4, they don't, in fact, neither one of them wears a 10. And then the next thing that we want to get at is culture and climate. I mean, that is the straw that really stirs the drink. And so all of our schools who are taking part in our dashboard, which is free of charge, the playbook is free of charge, will have access to research-based strategies to close these opportunity gaps. Not only that, and I know we have, again, a couple other, some of our directors on this phone here, on this call here, and they will tell you that we are also providing real-time coaching and in the sense that we are providing each educational co-op with a diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator that will work directly with the schools in each of those co-ops. I mean, again, it's a huge change. This could really be a major game changer. And so we're excited about that. Now let's talk a little bit about our dashboard. Again, real-time data specific to each district and each school. And one of the first times we will have a warning signal that will signal that there is some type of disproportionality, whether it's students with disabilities, whether you have students in these areas here are chronically absent, out of school suspension, in school suspension, being represented in or not represented in high quality courses. Again, there are more things here. It also addresses students with IEPs as well. And so we're looking at overrepresentation and underrepresentation by ethnic group. And so some of the classifications we'll look for are grades, special ed status, whether it's a foster student, economically disadvantaged, EL status, primary language spoken at home, homeless, migrant, and so forth. So this is huge, real live data, and the data is only going to be available for that particular school district. So it's going to be inward facing. This is an inward facing tool that school districts will have. Now, our goal, after we begin to see patterns over a period of 2 to 3 years, we want our leaders in those districts who are working with these DEI coordinators to convene some type of meeting so we can learn and utilize these best practices. Again, a huge game changer. And now superintendents, teachers, and other folks don't have to run to 5 or 6 different places to gather this data. We'll use Infinite Campus IC to report this data out.
So question, so the diversity equity coordinator will be connected with the schools and their cooperative. Will the schools have to ask for those services, or they'll be looking at the data and reach out to the school district?
Very good question. currently 70 of our districts. And I hope after today, after I finish preaching today, I can call some more folks up. You know, I want to go back to the preaching metaphor. So if your school district, if your superintendent or deputy superintendent has not signed up to participate in the equity playbook, please do so. Right now, 70 of our 170 school districts have already signed up for equity playbooks. And the co-ops, again, Dr. Stark, when we talk about how can we create this greater union and this greater level of cooperation between K-12 and higher ed, it starts with everyone in the village working together to improve the outcomes for our students in the Commonwealth. And when we improve the outcomes for our students in the Commonwealth, our Commonwealth will continue to grow and thrive. And so we're working again with our co-ops and the coordinators, DEI coordinators, to work directly with the schools in helping to identify some of these gaps. Now, in one school district, that gap may not exist, whereas another type of gap will exist. That coordinator would work directly with those schools in that co-op region. So thanks for that question. Okay, moving on. And again, I made reference to this earlier. Here's an example between K-12, the Kentucky Department of Education, and higher ed in creating these A to the 4 modules. And it's a partnership again with the Council on Post-Secondary Education. And it's a framework designed to provide individuals with knowledge, skills, and attitudes to increase their effectiveness in working with students and staff from diverse backgrounds. And it's a train-the-trainer model. And when I get to the next steps, I think the first training is in October. And Dr. Stark and other folks who are on this, this conversation here, if you will, it's not only K-12. I have to say that this project, our work with equity, is supported by the Lieutenant Governor. It's been funded and supported by our governor as well. We'll talk a little bit about the CAPE program. And so, again, ensuring that as many people as possible are coming to the village to help raise our children. And again, we're going to provide training here in the next few weeks. We have 2 of the modules already done. We're going to complete the next 2 of the modules, awareness and acknowledgement. Again, acceptance and action. We've completed those models and beginning to roll out the PD, the accompanying PD that goes with it. Again, all free of charge, free of charge. Continuing with a couple other initiatives, many of you have taken the time, and I certainly want to thank you for giving me your feedback, not only superintendents and co-op directors, but also teachers, staff, and students. You've given me feedback and input relative to some of the equitable practices that are going on in your respective districts. In fact, a major school administrative organization has reached out to ask about our policy scan. We have completed the policy scan for last year, and then we'll be opening it up here in a couple of weeks. It'll be ongoing. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from your stories because there are great things that are happening in every district in Kentucky. So we want to simply learn from each other. Then also a huge game changer is the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Education. I know some of you received, there are 10 school districts that received one of the $50,000 grants, the Grow Your Own grant. And this program is meant not only for the recruitment of minority teachers, and when we talk about minority, we don't just mean teachers who look like me. We mean also students of other ethnicities who are in a minority status, could be because of socioeconomic reasons. So it's not only meant to recruit teachers, but it's also for the retention of minority educators to the profession. And again, it's open to all folks, regardless of their ethnicity. And it kind of reminds me of the work I was able to do in the early 90s while I was working on my doctorate in higher ed and communication back at the Ohio State University. I was in the College of Nursing. You probably say, well, how did this guy get into College of Nursing? Because I was working on higher ed and I was advising nursing students, but it also helped that my wife at the time was working on her doctorate in nursing too. So it was sort of like a package deal. And I remember our work to diversify the nursing, and then later on I worked in the Ohio State University College of Medicine to diversify the nursing students and medical students at the Ohio State University. And many of our inner city African-American students didn't quite make the mark, as well as many of our white Appalachian students and some of our poor students. And so what we did, we were able to get funding to pair these students, whether Appalachian white students or some of our inner city African-American students, with mentors that provided them with coaching, whether it was with the NCLEX exam upon graduation, or coaching and helping to get them into the College of Nursing, or the MCAT and helping students, some of these same students who actually went on to med school as well, helping them get into the College of Medicine. And so we're able to really harness the power of mentorship. Mentorship is huge. It is huge. And that's what really the CAPE program is about. It's about mentoring, and it's about closing those opportunities. Again, not about achievement so much, it's about opportunity gaps. Whether you're Black, white, or any ethnicity out there, we experience challenges out there. And so we were able to do that work, and we diversified the College of Nursing, and we had a tremendous pass rate. Our students had over a 95% pass rate because we eliminated those opportunity gaps.
We have a question.
Sure.
And so the question is, where does a district go to for the to sign up for the equity playbook? What does district go to sign up for the equity playbook, or should they know?
It's on the Kentucky Department of Education website. Mm-hmm. Please feel free to email me. You all have my email address. Please feel free to email me. At the end, I'm even going to give you my social media contacts as well, how to reach me via Twitter. But feel free to email me. In fact, I've been known to give thousands of people my phone number. So I'll even give you my phone number because I really believe in this work. It was this type of work that saved my life. It's this type of work that improved my life because back in my small hamlet in Arkansas, our farmers and community members sacrificed financially to ensure that I had the best teachers. And so how can we ensure equity every day? And this is actually from the American Association of School Administrators Leadership Network, but it's also a conversation that I've had with some of my colleagues around KDE. And so some of the things that we talked about, one of my colleagues is Roger Cleveland in particular, and many of you met Roger. But some of the things that we've talked about in ensuring equity every day, and it has to be something that we're committed to, and one person can't do it. It just can't be Thomas Tucker at KDE. It has to be everyone committed at KDE. Every staff member, every teacher, I think we have like 46,000 teachers. Every teacher, every support staff member, and every board member has to be committed to this work. And we have to hold ourselves accountable. And one of the quick ways to hold ourselves accountable is ensuring that this work is part of our strategic plan, our district strategic plan. It's part of our building improvement plans. And measuring, we've heard the old saying, is what gets measured is what gets done. So please ensure that if this is important, let's have some data behind it. Mm-hmm. Then you need to train for transformation with professional learning, focus on cultural humility, self-examination, really looking at yourselves and saying, what can we do to ensure that every student, what can we do equally important to challenge ourselves to ensure that every student has an opportunity to be fully successful You need to provide mental health and behavioral support for students and teachers. Again, huge, huge, huge. And I want to thank our Lieutenant Governor Coleman, not only for her support for Kate, but also for this huge initiative, statewide initiative in working with students regarding their mental health. So, and staff members as well. So I'm really pleased with that work. I think if you don't have an office that addresses equity and opportunity and achievement in your district, you should. And it really starts also with having some type of policy or resolution to ensure that you're building the capacity for every student to be successful. You should work hard to ensure that you have diverse staff and diverse perspectives, and you honor those diverse perspectives. And you create this policy, again, that covers curriculum, instruction, communication, and enforcement of that policy. And then we need, as adults, we need to model the core values to the community and not be afraid to model those values. I know we've come under attack, and this work has been misconstrued as being critical race theory, and that could not be any further from the truth. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on if I'm not using up too much of my time. Again, I'm in this conversation mode because I really think one of the most effective ways that we can get this work going is that you don't need anyone to preach to you. It needs to be a shared conversation amongst friends and allies. So let's talk a little bit about our next step, and some of these things are well underway. We've provided funding for the A4 modules and full funding for the DEI coordinator. So each of our 8 co-ops will have this coordinator. The job descriptions have been approved, and you'll see some interviewing and hiring in the next couple of weeks to help carry out this work and provide the leadership, in person and virtual leadership, in carrying out helping with those tools in the toolkit. So really excited about that. Then we do have additional funding for book studies and some other things that will help us better understand our student population and to better understand ourselves as we become more effective educators. The equity toolkit training that I alluded to earlier is scheduled for October 20th and 21st. The location is to be announced. And we've asked our folks to select 2 individuals from each co-op to help lead the equity work, and that they will attend a 2-day equity toolkit training to include the dashboard, the playbook, and the 8 to the 4 cultural competency models. And we're really pleased with it. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Dr. Aaron Thompson and his heroic work for the Council of Post-Secondary Education in helping us build these modules and make them available to our schools across the Commonwealth. Then also, we'll have additional training for school leaders on our equity toolkit. So those are some of our next steps. I think now we're going to go ahead and transition to spend the next time conversing about some of the questions that you all have sent me and any other new questions. Dr. Stark, how are we doing with time? Yeah, she's muted. Brandon, are we doing okay with time?
We have another 40 minutes.
Okay, so we're doing okay
Yes.
with time. All right, and then because we had such a great audience, my goal is to also give folks a few minutes back in their day to enjoy the beautiful weather here in Kentucky. So let's go ahead and answer some of these questions, but maybe not. We may get deep into these questions here. So one of the first questions you all posed to me was, what is the Kentucky Board of Education's position on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And one of the things that really drew me here was that in July of 2020, over a year ago, your Kentucky Board of Education affirmed its commitment to racial equity, and they called it out, and racial justice in all schools in a resolution. That was hugely powerful, in that educational leaders must embrace diversity, ensure equity to shape the future of all students. Every student in the Commonwealth deserves equitable access, regardless of their background, to excellent educators. And the Commonwealth, through the funding of Kate, put his money where his mouth was or is. And one of the most powerful things that I've been able to do over the years is to provide a voice for kids and to fight for kids, even when it wasn't the popular thing to do. And so to have a state board of education pass a resolution affirming that and a commissioner backing it up. So it was a no-brainer in July for me to leave Colorado to come here. And so I really, to accept the job and come here to Kentucky. So it's great. When you even call out that young people, especially people of color, the recognition that students of color, and we're not trying to sweep it under the rug the way some of these laws that I'm going to talk about a little later want us to do, is sweep this under the rug. There have been people of color and our female students sometimes have not felt valued and safe in the community. Our LGBTQ plus students have not felt valued, but you have a board that's has called it out. So super heroic on part of some of our local school districts that have done the same. And then the next thing I'll add relative to DEI and student voice, during the same time, we added a student member on the Kentucky Board of Education, and we have a staff member as well. Of course, there were some lawmakers who wanted to repeal that, but thank God that wasn't happening, because our teachers and student voices matter, folks. That's why we're in this business. If we don't have any kids, we don't have jobs. If we don't have any teachers and support staff coming to work, why should we come to work? And so that was huge, huge game changer. Another question was, what replaced the Murrah Scholarship Program? And the Murrah Scholarship Program was a minority recruitment program. And I know, Dr. Stark, you were around the agency during that time and really worked diligently to use that program as a vehicle to diversify our teaching program. And so what has replaced that program is the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. And there are about 4 or 5 different parts to CATE, and we'll get to those parts. I've already mentioned the Grow Your Own program. The mentoring, assessment, and coaching, huge. I talked about that back in the 90s, even with my experience working with nursing students and med students. And so that part of CATE will provide participating students individualized support to develop a study plan. If we don't have a plan, we don't know where we're going. And strategies for success on admission assessment. So that's at the very beginning. We're going to identify these students and help them create a plan in terms of how to get admitted into our teacher education programs. And there's reimbursement for assessment related expenses, as well as guidance throughout their educator preparation program. Again, this really resonated with me because, again, this was award-winning work that we've done before. CCEC partnership to support CATE mentoring and assessment coaching. So we're working with CCEC to help with mentoring and the assessment coaching, because you go through a teacher education program, you spend your time, your money in it, you have all the passion in the world, but if you can't pass the exam, then what good is it? You know, you probably are in $30,000 worth of debt. You can't get past your exam. And so we want to start very early on, from the time you take the admission assessment throughout, preparing our students to do well on the assessment exam. And we know these assessment exams have been around for a while. They were even around when Dr. Tucker was around, and I had to take one as well. Also, the program will explore ways to remove obstacles to college students so they can pursue a career in education. Many times we have policies and practices in place that we think that's going to promote the profession, but really they are actually obstacles in people's way, in candidates' way, in pursuing a profession in education. And we also want to help with the praxis cost and relief. And again, we talk about what else we can do with K-12. This is huge. We have to collaborate with colleges and universities, deans, folks in the Nystrand Center, to ensure mentorship meets the needs of future educators becoming certified and prepared to enter the workforce, that they are ready, that our pre-service teachers are ready to enter the workforce. Then also the new CCEC Associate Director, David Morris, will be leading the CATE work. So we're excited about that as well. Again, bringing more people into the fold. So what has replaced the principal certification for Indigenous people of color, BIPOC? Now, like in states across the country, and this is unfortunate, in Kentucky, per the OCR docket 0304-1058, Kentucky entered an agreement to cease the Administrative Leadership Institute Principals Program because the courts found that it was discriminatory, because the funding was only available to Indigenous people of color. So that has gone away. But I will say this, I've been in conversations, and we may have some of these co-op directors or some of these K groups like the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents, the Kentucky Association of School Administrators, who are talking now about creating such a program to attract more students of color, to attract students from different backgrounds than many of the students that they are serving. So I was really excited about that conversation. So what has replaced the Minority Superintendent Internship Program? I know Dr. Starkey and I have talked about that. And what has essentially replaced it is the Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. It's not only dedicated to recruiting and the retention of teachers, but we also know when we recruit and retain teachers, great teachers, we are now recruiting and retaining great administrators. One of the things as a superintendent and as a principal, I would do when we had visitors and we had business folks coming to our buildings, into our school district, we would go into a class and I would say to this visitor, this business owner, when you look around this class, you're looking at your future workers. Please invest in your future workers. When we walk into our classrooms, we're looking at our future educators. Majority of our educators who are in our classrooms teaching now grew up, I think the research said, grew up, 60 miles from where they went to high school. Grew up. And so you're looking at your future workforce right there. And that's why when we talk about how great the Grow Your Own program is, and we need to provide more money for that. We hope that our lawmakers will continue to fund that program, Kate, each year, because we have some excellent ideas that have come out of there that we want to share in terms of whether you're growing your teaching staff by working with your paraprofessionals, or you're working with other staff who want to become principals or who want to become teachers, or you are working with your classroom, with your students, and you're expanding your own program in your school. So again, really excited about that.
I have a question.
Yes.
With the practice examination, and I know there's been, I'm not sure how serious the conversation is or where the conversation, or just rumor, that with EPS being the practice, is there some conversation surrounding maybe, since that's the gatekeeper, eliminating the practice examination as a certification instrument?
There has been some talk about it. No formal decision has been made yet. I would give Dr. Byron Darnell a call. He heads up our Office of Teacher Effectiveness and Licensure, and he would be a great resource to chat with regarding it. I do believe there are at least a couple states that don't use the practices as admission criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know, even way back when I took the practice in the subject area, states require, they set their own passing score. So a score in Kentucky may be higher than a score in Ohio. So there are levels of flexibility in that, but certainly give Dr. Darnell a call.
Yeah, and I asked that question because I was at a session earlier today, and they spoke about how educators, there's a test to even to go into a program.
Yes.
Professions, then there's not. And so what happens is that we are exiting people before they can even get into the program because we have a gate that's there before they can get into the program. And those people who truly want to become teachers, and you and I have seen many of them, they just
Yes,
was unable to pass the examination, but they were great teachers. Could have been great teachers, yes.
totally agree. And we even do that in our own schools, in our K-12 schools.
Mhm.
We set these barriers in place where students don't have access to Algebra 1 in middle school. And Lord knows we have plenty of barriers where we don't have students. And we have the data. Again, that's one of the beautiful things about our equity dashboard in our playbook. It's not about shaming and blaming or pointing fingers. It's about showing real live data and creating a plan. So now we have plays and strategies to address these deficiencies here. For example, why is it that such a low percentage of students of color are in AP courses? What are those gatekeepers? We know they're out there. We do know from research, once we open those courses up, the overall scores are not going to drop, certainly not in the long term. Again, same thing could be said for IB and so forth, but you're right. Many times we as adults, and I believe our intentions are good, but what we end up doing, it hurts the overall profession. It hurts the amount of rigor that students can have. So let's move on to DEI and CRT. Again, as I said earlier, I really haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about CRT because we don't talk about it and we don't do it. And one of the questions we're going to get, and one of the questions that Commissioner Glass faced a couple weeks ago, is that are schools in Kentucky teaching critical race theory? The answer is no. CRT is a research methodology normally taught in graduate schools. So if students in Kentucky aren't necessarily being taught CRT, what are some major tenets that they are being taught? And this is fair. Teaching hate for others based on skin color or history is unacceptable. Discriminatory, oppressive, or offensive behavior prohibits the ability of students to thrive, and saying one race is superior to another is not tolerated in Kentucky schools. And so I say to you, my friends, when you're confronted with this question, that's my response right there. That's always my response. I don't know how our teachers and support staff will have time to teach students at a high level for a deep level of understanding with the Kentucky academic standards and spend time teaching critical race theory. I just don't get it. And so I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking on that. And I certainly don't engage in conversations with political pundits who want to make CRT a huge issue. Our job is to eliminate opportunity gaps for all students in the Commonwealth. And that's where I keep the conversation.
Mhm.
Continuing some more conversations regarding CRT. There are numerous examples of educators teaching and discussing historical events. And that's one of the things that we really need to shape, where discrimination and or oppression were at the center of those events, and status exists and maintained as such in KRS, such as genocide. And so again, it's impossible, when we look at some of these laws a little later, to ignore a discrimination and oppression that existed. I mean, are we going to say this event did not happen in America? Are we going to say this event didn't happen in Germany? Mm-hmm. So furthermore, we see educators engage students in conversations regarding current events that impact their lives, their community, and our country. And your Kentucky Department of Education recognized a goal is to prepare all of our students for civic engagement and I'll add this, civic discourse. Your KDE is also working on guidance for educators that will help teach students agency and empathy through social and emotional learning. And we're also working on guidance, Dr. Stark and our other folks who are with us, we're working on guidance to help folks navigate this conversation around critical race theory. And the last bit here on CRT and SEL, social emotional learning, are CRT and social emotional learning say, absolutely not. Again, we have these political pundits who want to make this say, no, this is about removing opportunity gaps for students and tending to their social and emotional learning. According to the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, that's the CASEL model, which is the gold standard model for SEL, the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. Why would we not want this for all of our students? These are good, healthy steps. So in short, SEL helps students learn about themselves and others with the goal of making responsible choices. It is not political, nor is it racist, and nowhere have I heard it stated or I've seen it written where it says that one group of people is more superior than others, or other folks are, bad simply because of their ethnicity or quote unquote race. If that's happening, we have a moral and an educational obligation to stop that nonsense, to stop those types of conversations. Our school districts mandated to follow KDE guidelines regarding DEI. Is there a monitoring system or document? In short, the answer is no. Kentucky is a locally controlled state. We at KDE, in collaboration with teachers, higher ed staff, and parents, craft the standards. Per the state law, your local committees, and we'll get into that a little later, develop the curriculum. And that's also one of the conversations that we'll talk a little bit about as well, that's happening amongst our lawmakers. What are standards and what's curriculum? How can we educate the community of these topics? Folks, this is huge. I think, again, we have both an educational and a moral obligation to educate people. We are our community members. And it begins with our allies. We need to ensure through our presentation that we provide guidance documents, we use science, and we provide feedback loops. In fact, this presentation here is available to anyone who needs it. And I ask, if there's anything that you can take out of here that's useful, please share it in your community. And we need to listen. One of the great things that our Commissioner of Education did very early on last year was to have his listening tour. And Dr. Glass virtually went to every segment through our co-ops in this community. And also he provided special sessions with students with unique abilities. And he also provided a session in Spanish to hear from our community members, and anyone who wanted to partner with us, to understand what were some of the successes and challenges so that we could work together. So I think that's huge. Then also, I go back again, and it starts and ends with this, making sure it's a priority that we have a multi-tiered system of support, that we operationalize it, and we fully address the social and emotional needs of our students. And one of the things that we don't do a great job of, we don't highlight our success stories. There are districts and there are schools that are doing an awesome, awesome job of this, ensuring that more and more students have access. And how do I know? I am deeply involved with some of the most impressive, most insightful, most engaging students in all of America. And that's with the Commissioner's Student Advisory Council. And I could also say and brag about our Principal Advisory Council and our Teachers Advisory Council. If you want to hear what's best about education, and you want to really get a feel about the future of Kentucky and what great hands we are, listen to those three groups. Listen to those three groups. And we need to continue to tell the great stories that they have. And amazing things are happening here in Kentucky. And I'm not just saying that because I'm your Deputy Commissioner of Education and I'm the Chief Equity Officer. I'm not just saying it, it's because I see it. And we have plenty of work to do, don't get me wrong, in our agency and beyond. But I do know together we can make education more powerful here in Kentucky. So how can KDE school districts look at a more, or create, I should say, a more inclusive curriculum? One is the design and development of the curriculum. It's a local decision. I talked about that earlier under KRS 160.35. There are also KDE guidance supports that we're really happy about. And our agency is responsible for academic standards, and state law assigns each local school board decision-making to the SBDM Council. So that's where it starts. We also have the creation of a model curriculum framework, which is really about best practices and standards to support student equity. Then we talked earlier about high quality instructional resources and what they were. These are resources that are aligned to the Kentucky academic standards, that's free of bias. It represents our students, and it's culturally relevant. And then we move on to instructional resources alignment rubrics. These are rubrics that are aligned to the Kentucky academic standards that are also aligned to high quality instructional resources. So any questions so far about any of the curriculum guidance and support that we offer?
I think one question is, having standards is a beginning, but not useful unless used or encouraged to use. And that was a question from Beverly Moore, and you've indicated that earlier that the standards are there, and some things that you can't mandate. You can encourage and strongly encourage and provide the resources with that. Correct?
Yes, and remember our standards, whether they're here in Kentucky, in Ohio, Colorado, or Kansas, our standards are the floor. It's the basics of what students should know and be able to do in specific grade levels. And we here in Kentucky, we want to go beyond the standards. We want to ensure we go back again to the model curriculum framework, where you'll find more engaging and more rigorous resources and opportunities for students and staff members to go beyond the standards. And also, I would be remiss if I did not mention the importance of professional development, ensuring that our teachers have a deep understanding of those standards. And then that's where our SBDMs go beyond the standards in our respective communities. Again, evidence-based instructional practices and establishing the learning climate is huge. It's one thing to have these instructional based practices, these EBIPs in place, but it's another thing ensuring that we have a climate that is conducive for learning. And then, and again, it serves as a guidance for teachers in creating a climate. And then we go to the creating a collaborative civic space. This CCSS is a model to examine the role of teachers and students in collaborating and operating in civic spaces, in collaborating and having open conversations so that students and staff can collaborate and explore some of these resources. And in the future, you'll continue to see more opportunities and more initiatives on our part to have a more inclusive curriculum, again, a curriculum that is reflective of all of our students, of their backgrounds, of their ethnicities, and that really appreciate that. And again, we're just very fortunate to have almost $250,000 in funding from the Council of Chief State School Officers to provide this opportunity for students. And you're going to see this pilot program take off this fall. So, and that's under one of my directors in the Office of Teaching and Learning, Mickey Ray, who does a fantastic job. So, what are KDE and state legislators discussing regarding DEI? So what is the skinny on their conversations? Well, from my perspective and talking with our policy folks at KDE, there's quite a bit of scuttlebutt and conversations about understanding equity, inclusion, and equality. Again, going back to understanding context before content and having a shared language. Also, as we talk quite a bit about the development of standards versus the development of curriculum. And that was a very astute question that the other person asked. Who's responsible for standards, KDE? Who's responsible for developing curriculum? Those would be a site-based decision matter. Then local authority of districts and school site-based making, SBD and councils, again, that is their authority. And many of our lawmakers are asking, well, what are some of the things they do? Do they approve textbooks? Do they approve instructional materials? And the answer to that would be yes. Now, with our pilot project dealing with HQIR, high quality instructional resources, and I may add an M, materials, we want to ensure that each curricular resource, remember curriculum could be your pacing guides, your textbooks, both online textbooks, hard copies of your textbook, supporting documents, etc. We want to make sure that our folks utilize this rubric. Again, we cannot mandate, we can't force people to do this. But we want to make sure that they've been vetted by an outside source. We use Ed Reports. It's an independent, not-for-profit that goes through a very fine, scientifically based rubric to look for bias in the curriculum, look for representation and so forth. Again, because we know how important it is for students to see themselves in the curriculum. We know how important that we have a variety of curriculum to meet the needs of our students because they come from different backgrounds. So we hope that our SBDMs will look at this list of highly rated instructional materials as they go about selecting the curriculum in their respective districts. So as we get ready to close here a little bit, we want to talk a little bit about what bills have been pre-filed for this upcoming year in the legislative session. And some of you may know a little bit more about these bills than I do, but I'm going to give you my quick understanding of these bills here. BR 60, it's the Education Non-Discrimination Act. And it simply says that Kentucky public and charter schools are prohibited from offering instruction or having discussions regarding concepts related to race or ethnicity, sex, to me, gender, and religion. You can't have these So the big question is, and maybe we can have this discussion from now until tomorrow, and I do know some of you need to take off, but how are you going to discuss some of the major issues in history without talking about race, gender, and religion? But if you do, if this bill is passed, there will be penalties and fines. I think the Attorney General can assess up to a $5,000 fine against any educator who violates, if this becomes law, violates this law, and the Commissioner of Education will be directed to take monies from the school district. BR 69 is very similar to the previous bill we just talked about, BR 60. It's an Education Non-Discrimination Act. In public education, that would be public schools and charter schools are prohibited from having instruction, teaching concepts, again, related to race, sex, and religion, including professional development. Like staff members would go and have professional development on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that would be that would no longer be allowed, be prohibited. And any school district employee that violates this prohibition is subject to disciplinary action. Now, it doesn't say, Dr. Stark and others who are here, what that disciplinary action is versus BR 60, but it could be anything. It just simply said disciplinary action.
And that's what well, I'll let you finish the bills because we have a
Yes.
question.
And the next one are still related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but those two bills are directly, I see directly, BR 60 and 69 are directly related to our folks are confounding wrongly critical race theory. Now, they're pre-filed, they're not law, but there are about 15 to 20 states that I know of. I stopped counting a couple months ago that have similar pre-filed legislation. And some states, like our neighbors to the south in Tennessee, have already passed laws preventing that. Now, in some states like Iowa, it just says don't do it, but it doesn't carry any penalties or anything. So there are some states, my friends, who wrongly have passed laws like that. So moving on to BR 102, it's an act relating to state benefits for veterans. And one of the important things I like about this is more about the inclusion part here. It's going to ensure that our veterans who have been honorably discharged, as well as our veterans who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, have access to their benefits. So that's making benefits for veterans more inclusive. So we're really excited about that. But it's also a teaching opportunity for us, not only in higher ed, but also in K-12 through your ROTC programs and other programs, that we need to ensure that our folks who are involved in these programs, these ROTC programs, that they will have, they are eligible for some of these benefits. So a very good move, in my opinion, towards greater inclusion. And BR 201, it is the Crown Act. It's race and protective hairstyles that deals with discrimination in schools, which will make it, you can no longer prohibit in our public and charter schools disciplining students because of their hairstyles. And many times these hairstyles are related to race, cornrows, dreads, and things like that. So again, I see that being more inclusive, and we're going to stop the discrimination of students based upon their hairstyles. So excited about that. And another hot bill that's been going around, a lot of talk, not only in K-12, but in higher ed, Fairness in Women's Sports Act, Interscholastic Athletics, designation for eligibility based on biological sex requirements. And what it does, it prohibits males from participating in female sports. And if you want some additional information about that, I would certainly reach out to the heads of your athletic federations here in Kentucky. BR 185 is an act related to student mental health. And now when you look at your attendance policies, or at least school districts and boards have to go back and revisit their attendance policies, because you need a provision there for students who are having mental health and behavioral issues. And again, I think all of this is certainly, to an extent, is driven by COVID. So I'm glad that we're thinking more inclusive and being more respectful of students' mental health and their behavior, and how there is a nexus between their mental health and behavior and COVID. And that is it. Thank you. If you all do have my email address, you can also, as the youngsters say, you can hit me up on Twitter at ttucker1914. And I'll do as I've continued to do for the last 20 years. I can give you all my personal mobile number if you need to reach me. That number is 614-446-1600. And I have to say, I've literally given my number out to over 100,000 people. I am yet to get one prank phone call. If I get one tonight, I'm gonna go back and see how many folks are still left here, and I'll know Dr. Stark who has pranked me tonight.
Hey, absolutely. But hey, thank you. But we do have a couple of questions.
Sure, I definitely would like to answer
basically
some of those questions.
Like that's one of the question was from Trinidad Jackson. She was concerned with she was interested in the legislators who are discussing DEI curriculum content since their colleagues are putting forth these white supremacist bills. And with that, Trinidad, I mean, the legislative session doesn't happen until January, but right now there's a special session to deal
Yes.
with mass mandates that's happening this week, that's happening right now.
Absolutely. And Mr. Trinidad, thanks, for that question. And I understand how you phrased it. But I think we hopefully are moving in a direction that's more inclusive and respectful of students in regards to gender, in regards to ethnicity, even if it's, hairstyle, in regards to student and respect for one's mental health. But Dr. Stark, I think you broke up a little bit. I think you were talking about the emergency conversations that we're having right now with our lawmakers to discuss these mask mandates. And I hope and pray and I support our Kentucky Board of Education. I certainly support our Commissioner of Education, Commissioner Glass, in enforcing this mask mandate for all students. We already know, and we can go on and on here for the next 3 minutes that we have, the number and types of students who and staff and people in our community who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. We know that it's been poor people and people of color who've been disproportionately impacted by COVID, certainly prior to the introduction of the vaccines.
And Dr. Tuck, I want to thank you all because more importantly, as one of the things that he said was that how do we have these courageous conversations? Because all too often we don't have the platforms to have these conversations. So what happens is so much misinformation is out there and people believe that. So we are empowering each and every one of you all because we all can do something in the spaces and places that we occupy. But we have to have the courage to do that and know that we're going to make mistakes along the way. But we have to continue to have those conversations because look at where we are right now. We're dealing with multiple pandemics,
Yes.
not only COVID-19, we're speaking about educational disparities, economic disparities, voter suppression, the insurrection. We talk about gun legislations, mass shootings, critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, teachers being assaulted, administrators being assaulted. We're speaking about a lot of different things that's happening in our country, and we all are being impacted one way or the other. But the key is but we all can do something. What's going to be our charge? Because we can't say, oh, I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to do something. We all can do something, whether it begins at the dinner table, whether it begins at work with our colleagues or different places, but we all can do something because, as we look at our country right now, it's like, oh my goodness, is this the United States of America? But we all can do something. So we are, encouraging you, we ask, whatever information that you need from KDE that Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker Division can provide you or support you with, or whatever the Nystrand Center can help and support you with, we're willing to do that because we need all hands on deck. This is not something that we can do alone, we can do, in isolation. It has to be a collective effort.
Yeah. Amen. And I could not have said it any better.
Well, hey, thank you, Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker. Is there any other questions? We do have 1 minute. And we want to thank you all for coming because, it's not just enough to come here, but to take this information and go back and do something, in the spaces and places that you occupy.
And be fearless too. I mean, we have to be fearless. We have to be fearless in the things that we believe in. And this is the most important work. Education is the most, from my perspective, the most important work we can do, the most important work in this country. Because when people ask, what do we as educators do? I say we do two things. we improve lives, and we save lives.
Yes. Absolutely, and we're building global citizens.
Yes.
Global, it's not just, it goes so much, and diversity goes so much, goes beyond black and white, because so many times we just get caught up with that, but
Yes.
diversity encompasses so many different things. So again, we want to just to stay collectively together with us and continue to stay connected in whatever we can do to support. That's what we're going to do. The Nystrand Center, our goal is to provide information, to not only K-12, but higher ed, and also the community at large as well, because that's what we need to do. But also know that Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker cannot do this by himself. I cannot do it by myself. It's a collective effort.
Yes. Amen. Thank you. Have a great evening. Stay safe, and God bless you.
Hey, thank you.